Nearly 3,000 Allied ships sent to the bottom by a submarine force that was never supposed to exist. Banned from building U-boats under Versailles, Germany secretly laid down its first hulls in the early 1930s. By 1945, over 1,100 boats had entered service across more than a dozen distinct classes, each a response to shifting strategy, industrial reality, or desperation. It started with two deeply flawed prototypes. Germany's first steps back into submarine warfare began with two experimental classes, the Type I and Type II. Both were shaped by the restrictions of the Versailles Treaty, which forced designers to work in secrecy and left the Navy with little recent experience. The Type I, built in 1935, was a double-hulled vessel weighing 862 tons, surfaced and stretching nearly 72 meters. It carried 4 torpedo tubes at the bow and 2 at the stern, with a total of 14 torpedoes, double the payload of pre-war prototypes. Powered by diesel-electric engines, it could reach 17 knots on the surface and 8 knots submerged. But its range, about 7,800 nautical miles surfaced, proved inadequate for the Atlantic ambitions that soon followed. Only 2 Type I boats were completed, and both suffered from mechanical problems and poor seakeeping. They served mainly as test beds, exposing flaws in construction and reliability that would need to be addressed before mass production could begin. The Type II was a different answer to the same challenge. Much smaller at 279 tons surfaced and just over 40 meters long, it was designed for coastal patrols and, crucially, for training new crews. With 3 forward torpedo tubes and a surface range of 1,600 nautical miles, the Type II could reach 13 knots on the surface and 7 knots submerged. Its small size made it agile in the North Sea and Baltic, but limited endurance and cramped quarters meant it was never suited for ocean raiding. Around 50 Type IIs were built, forming the backbone of Germany's early training pipeline and giving hundreds of sailors their first taste of undersea operations. Both classes revealed the gaps in Germany's submarine knowledge and underscored the need for a larger, more capable ocean-going hunter, a demand that would soon be answered by the Type VII. The Type VII was the backbone of Germany's Atlantic campaign. More than 700 of these boats were built, 709 in total, making it the most produced submarine class in history. Streamlined for both speed and efficiency, the Type VII could reach 17.7 knots on the surface and 7.6 knots submerged, with a surfaced range of 8,500 nautical miles. That range was just enough to reach the convoy lanes of the North Atlantic and return, but not much farther. Most Type VIIs carried 5 torpedo tubes and up to 14 torpedoes, with a crew of about 44 men packed into tight quarters. The real power of the Type VII came from numbers and tactics. Karl Dönitz, architect of Germany's submarine strategy, pushed for mass production and coordinated attacks, wolf packs, that overwhelmed Allied convoys. At the peak of the campaign in 1942, more than 100 Type VIIs were patrolling the Atlantic at once. In March 1943 alone, U-boats torpedoed over 120 merchant ships, forcing the Allies to reroute traffic and scramble for new defenses. The Type VII's success was built on speed of construction and the ability to operate in groups. Shipyards across Germany turned out hundreds of hulls, with variants like the VIIB and VIIC improving range, depth, and armament. But the limited endurance of the class meant that U-boats could only strike so far before needing to return to base or meet up with supply boats. As Allied countermeasures improved, the high losses among Type VIIs began to show the limits of their design. Still, for a critical window in the war, the Atlantic workhorse held the upper hand. The Atlantic was too vast for most German submarines to patrol without support. Type IX boats answered this challenge with a surfaced range of up to 13,450 nautical miles, nearly doubling what the Type VII could manage. These long-range raiders hunted far from European bases, reaching the Gulf of Mexico, the South Atlantic, and even the Indian Ocean. But distance brought new problems. To keep their patrols going, U-boats needed to refuel, rearm, and resupply while still at sea. That's where the Type XXI supply submarines, nicknamed milk cows, came in. These boats didn't carry torpedoes for attack. Instead, they were floating gas stations and warehouses loaded with fuel, food, and spare parts. A Type XXI could refuel several attack boats at once, extending their reach by thousands of miles and keeping the pressure on Allied shipping lanes. Another specialized class, the Type XB, was built for mine warfare. At over 1,700 tons submerged, these were among the largest U-boats of the war. Each could carry up to 66 sea mines in external shafts, enough to close off entire shipping lanes or bottle up enemy harbors. Although only 8 Type XBs were built, their mines caused significant disruptions and forced the Allies to divert resources to mine clearing. Later in the war, most Type XBs were converted for transport and supply duties, reflecting the growing need to support distant patrols as Allied defenses tightened. Together, these specialized submarines turned the Atlantic into a battlefield that stretched from the Arctic to the equator. By 1943, German U-boats were operating worldwide, but every mile from home made them more dependent on support assets and more vulnerable to Allied countermeasures. High-speed underwater travel was once a distant dream for submarine designers, but Helmuth Walter believed he could make it real. Walter's idea was to use hydrogen peroxide as a fuel, decomposing it to create steam and oxygen for a closed-cycle turbine. This would free submarines from the limits of battery endurance and let them sprint beneath the surface at speeds no diesel-electric boat could match. The first proof came in 1940 with the tiny V-80 testbed, which reached 19 knots submerged, more than double the speed of any operational U-boat at the time. Encouraged, the Kriegsmarine ordered 3 full-scale prototypes, 2 Type VIII boats, and a single Type XXIII. On paper, these boats promised speeds up to 25 knots underwater, a figure that would have left Allied escorts far behind. But the Walter turbine was risky and temperamental. Hydrogen peroxide was volatile, prone to leaks and explosions, and the machinery demanded constant attention. Trials in 1944 and 1945 produced short bursts of high speed, but never the sustained performance needed for combat. Only 3 prototypes were completed, and none saw action. The Walter boats showed what might be possible, but the dangers and shortages of peroxide made the technology a dead end for wartime production. Dr. Bernhard Gerhardt's vision for the Type XXI or Elektroboot was simple: a submarine that belonged underwater. Earlier U-boats were surface ships that could submerge in emergencies. The Type XXI flipped that logic. Its hull was sleek and unbroken, built for speed and silence below the waves. No deck guns, no anchors, just a streamlined shell that could slice through the water at 17 knots submerged, a pace no previous U-boat could sustain. Inside, the leap was even greater. Triple the battery capacity of the Type VII meant the Type XXI could remain underwater for up to 75 hours at 5 knots, crossing the Bay of Biscay without surfacing. A snorkel let the diesels run while submerged, recharging those massive batteries in hours. 6 torpedo tubes in the bow, paired with hydraulic reloads, allowed a full spread to be fired and reloaded in under 20 minutes. Between 1944 and 1945, 118 Type XXI boats were commissioned. Their design set the blueprint for Cold War submarines worldwide. As defeat loomed, Germany turned to compact and specialized designs for its final U-boat classes. The Type XXIII, a coastal Elektroboot, was built for stealthy operations in shallow waters and congested shipping lanes. At just under 35 meters long and displacing 234 tons surfaced, it carried 2 forward torpedo tubes and a crew of 14. Its streamlined hull and electric drive allowed speeds up to 12.5 knots submerged, impressive for its size. 61 Type XXIIIs were completed, and several managed to sink Allied ships in the final weeks of the war, showing how even small submarines could threaten coastal convoys when equipped with advanced technology. Meanwhile, the Type VIIC-41 represented the last major refinement of the Atlantic workhorse. Reinforced with thicker pressure hulls, these boats could dive to depths of 300 meters, far deeper than earlier models, giving them a better chance to evade depth charges and sonar. They retained the familiar 5-tube armament and diesel-electric propulsion, but their improved survivability was a direct answer to relentless Allied anti-submarine tactics. While neither class could change the outcome, their designs pointed toward the future, influencing post-war submarine fleets from Norway to the Soviet Union. Today, submarine warfare is driven by stealth, endurance, and constant adaptation, principles first forged in these German designs. As naval technology races forward, each new class worldwide still reflects lessons learned in steel, silence, and survival beneath the waves. The undersea contest never truly ends. Share your thoughts below.